Hey, this is Jason Piccolo. Welcome to the Break It Down show. Pete and his crew are reaching almost 1,000 episodes. It's an incredible show. I've been on a few times. Pete and his crew have been on my show. They're doing incredible things. Can I say that too much? They are doing incredible things. Seriously. I'd like to welcome James Rosebush to the show today. Now, Pete and crew, take it away.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Crew.
This is Bryce Vine.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This
East.
is Sebastian Younger.
This is Daryl.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
This is Dr. Bob Greenberg.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is James Rosebush, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
And now, the Break It Down show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yeah, I got Tommy Coyle sitting here with me. We're going to do this. Tom produced this episode. So I guess, Tom, I'm going to get out of the way and tell us why the heck we're talking to, who the hell is James Rosebush and what's he done anyway?
So actually, just first off, how we even met was actually a very interesting kind of situation. We both were introduced to a mutual friend. His real thing, we were both leadership gurus. And one thing about James, he's really doing about organizational leadership. That's his bread and butter right now. But the very fascinating history about James is he was in the Reagan White House, serving as a close aide to Ronald Reagan. And just all those relationships being in the White House and being at those points in history. He has some great stories about, which I'll let him tell, about the Berlin Wall specifically. I like to talk about that. And this is his entire career, and just then helping organizations and people become their best selves, another mission that he's kind of committed to today. And so, that's James in a nutshell. Jim, why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about just a couple highlights for you, if you wouldn't mind.
I like that. What does a nutshell really mean? That's great. So great to be on talking with you, Tom and Pete, today. This is really interesting. And of course, it was a great honor for me to meet Tom, another person who's really committed to advancing the cause of leadership, because people today are really stumped by what leadership means. I think whether you're in the corporate sector or the political sector, people are always saying, we need leadership. We need good leaders, which is absolutely true. But I have to say that having focused on this subject and having created a handful of leadership institutes and being an executive coach and speech coach myself, people are always looking for leaders and they're looking for leadership. But despite the fact that we have thousands and thousands of leadership institutes and schools and training centers, even starting at the elementary school age level, we have less and less of it. So this is a big question that I think about all the time. Why is it that we spend more time training leaders, but we have less of great leadership? And the only thing that I've been able to come up with is that we train in the wrong way. We focus on helping people be their authentic self, but it's all about self-promotion more than finding out what the audience is really looking for. And we really have a crisis I think, in the lack of empathy. People today are very obsessed with their own success, where they're going. They're told by coaches, focus on yourself. The sky's the limit. Wake up in the morning, look in the mirror and say, I'm the greatest thing that ever happened in the world, and I can do this. Well, some of that is wonderful. And I have friends that have attended those kinds of coaching sessions. But on the other hand, when I'm teaching people how to communicate or how to be leaders, I focus on how to build a bridge to your audience. And if you don't have a bridge to your audience, you're not connecting with the audience. Now, how do you connect with that audience? And maybe we can talk a little bit about that. But anyway, we got off on the whole leadership and communication theme, which I think are two of the most probably in trouble issues that we have today, and we need more of: good communication and good leadership.
Yeah. And I want to throw a third element in there, and it's sort of a wild card because it doesn't cover everything, but it kind of covers everything. It's sort of a catch-all, I guess, and that's culture. And if you have cultural acuity, people often talk about EQ and their emotional intelligence, but I would submit, from a guy that's been overseas a lot, and I'm sure you've done the same thing, if you've got cultural acuity, you can handle the EQ part of the mission a little more easily. But if you forget CQ, cultural intelligence, you're going to struggle to be a good leader, because culture doesn't have to collide. It can intersect, it can channel, but you have to be willing to see how it channels already and then work within that system instead of, oftentimes leaders say, like, I've created this culture. Have you? That's always my question. Have you? Can we find it? Can I go out and experience it right now? And would you want to know if, as a guy who goes out and looks at these things, if I couldn't find it, if I found a different culture, and if I could map it for them? So I think that's a good way to create like a trifecta, because you're right. If you can't communicate, which is part of communication and culture and leadership, and you're going to have trouble getting people to follow you. So how does someone, there are so many different schools of thought. There are so many different people that think they do it well. If you and I had a conference room full of 100 people and we're going to give this talk to people, and we said, if you're a bad leader, raise your hand, I bet 50 hands wouldn't go up. But the reality is 50 people in that room are probably, they're below average as measured against each other.
Well, I want to go back to what you were saying there. You added culture into the mix of communication and leadership. I think that is massive. I'm thinking about this all the time because, we tend to think about our time right now in the world where we are is extremely contemptuous, a lot of hatred, so much division. And I get really tired of that word division. Oh, we're divided, we're divided, we're divided. Well, what we're really divided about is culture. Our politics are fine. We are a two-party system. When, I learned this working in the White House. When you're the party in power, it is the opponents. Your opponent's job is to do everything they can to get you out of power. That's the reality of it. And by the way, we're not living in a more extreme time now than in other eras of American history. Even in the very earliest days of the founders, we tend to think of, this was a hallowed time when everything was. No, people were, we had duels. We had people trying to shoot each other on the floor of the halls of Congress. We don't have that today. But I will say that the extremes of culture change have really fostered people to both have to retreat to taking sides. And there's a lot of anguish over changes in culture. But do we really understand this? Do we really understand how culture relates, as you were saying, to communication and to leadership? I think it's a perfect trifecta. You have to understand what's going on in the minds of others. And I often use this example. Most of what we say, we think is being heard the way we say it.
Yes.
Now, as I just said that to you, Pete, you may not be hearing it the way I'm speaking it, but I think in my own consciousness that I just said to you, culture is, it's a perfect trifecta with those three things. You might have taken it in an entirely different way. One time when I was negotiating with the Chinese, so I go there I was a part of a team negotiating in Beijing, and we had to stay there day after day after day after day. And we're sitting on the other side of the table with our counterparts. And we're basically putting down a series of our of our demands, right? What we're looking for. Every day, no acquiescence to what we were looking for at all. And finally, after 10 days of this and eating what they consider very honorable food, which for us, their high level food is sea slugs and monkey head soup and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
And I said, we're out of here. We're going to leave. And we've tried every way we could. So then I'm thinking, well, this is what happened. So we get on an Air Force plane, we fly back to Washington, we think our heads are hanging low, right, Pete? Because this is a global controversy. This is a breaking news story that we did not succeed in our mission. So we walk into the Situation Room and people are applauding, I don't know whether there were 6 of us or something like that. They were applauding us and we're like, what are you applauding for? We're going to lose our jobs. I mean, we thought we would be fired. Yeah. Right. And they're applauding and I said, what are you applauding about? Well, while you were flying back, the Chinese agreed to everything you asked for.
Oh, wow.
So this fits into that conundrum of, am I being heard the way I think I'm speaking? And it comes down and believe me, the people that I coach, the fabulous, wonderful people that I coach and the companies I work with, I see this as a tremendous problem, the inability of people to hear what they're saying the way what they're saying is heard by the recipient. Do you follow me?
I believe I follow you completely. I've experienced these things, and I think when you get into an international setting where you're cross-religion, cross-language, cross-politics, cross, it's very difficult to communicate effectively. And yeah, you have to slow down. The thing I learned is I had to take my ego and my intentions completely out of this, because if we were both ego-driven, we were never going to get anywhere except for loggerheads. And so when I would talk to our partners or whoever it was I was dealing with, I would want to understand what their situation was. I called it the infrastructure of the mind. Like, how is their furniture laid out in their head? You say trifecta, I picture a triangle, but I don't know what they picture. Like, how do you envision this? And culture requires and leadership requires the building of trust, but you don't just get to say, I built trust. Or how about this one? I love this one. People always say, build rapport, and then move on. And like, okay, well, but slow down. Like, you can't just say build rapport. Like, it's actually a process, and you have to work through it. And your goal is to build, like, as in terms of international for me, right? Your goal initially is to build a relationship, establish rapport, prove it, test it, establish trust, ratchet up the level of trust, because you don't start asking for things before that. It's just it's not an effective way of getting those things done.
I know, but Pete, I'm going to tell you right now, there's a crisis in the ability of people to establish relationships.
Okay.
People, I get this all the time, and I'm just going to tell you that. I mean, and this is why I wrote this third bestseller of my. I don't know if you can see it or not. Winning your audience. Okay, so people say to me, well, Mr. Rosebush, could you help us out, because we have a hard time establishing relationships.
Yeah.
I hear this over and over again. I think that, that book that was out maybe, I don't know, like 8 years ago, Bowling Alone, or,
yes.
People. So you go to a bar, before, COVID, you see people, and I've had this with my corporate advisory clients, right? There'll be sales teams. Well, you go into a sales event, they're all hanging with their own colleagues. They're supposed to be integrated with their customers.
Yeah.
Okay. But then they say to me, we don't know how to do it. We don't know how to do it. How did this happen? How did this happen that we have a whole generation of people that don't know how to connect with other people physically? Okay. Connect has become a platform term. Okay, we're connected virtually, right? Okay, so we're connected. We're on the same platform, but are we on the same plane of thinking in terms of being able to relate to the other person for whether it's for business purposes or just having a relationship? I think that's why you see so many people in certain generational groups. They're not getting married. They're not having they're not, whatever kind of marriage you believe in, they're not having relationships, which are critical to human survival. Yeah. I think my next book is going to be on that, because Dale Carnegie, which is the book I'm trying to replace. So Dale Carnegie wrote, How to Win Friends and Influence People. So I kind of did the influence people with this book, but I think next I really want to examine this phenomenon of the inability to have to develop an interpersonal relationship. And people ask me, well, how should we do that? Well, I tell them this story. Sometimes I tell them the story of when I met Mary Martin, who's a famous stage actress and film actress. And we were working together on the South Lawn of the White House one day. And I stopped her. I said, why do your audiences like you so much? And she threw her arms around me, which is great, right? I love that. She's holding me. And I said, why are you so popular? And she said, well, two things. Jim, I was born in Texas. And secondly, I was born loving people. Oh. And I often tell my audiences that you have to have enough love. And we can use other terms for that: curiosity, interest. You have to invest in other people in order to get it back. Yeah. And that is one of the key things that's lacking today. And it starts with the simple term I use, curiosity. I say to people, go up to someone and just say, hey, where were you born?
Yeah.
You watch this. What they'll tell you, well, I work at General Motors, and I'm like, no. Where were you born?
Yeah.
Oh, well, actually, my parents were in the military. I was born in North Africa or something like that. Then you've got, oh, well, that's really interesting, right? So you know where I'm going with this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's how you establish that relationship. You know, he's that person. From how I'm understanding this, that person is jumping ahead to like business talk. Like, here's my short bio. And then you have this more formulaic conversation. That's really like, how's your back? How are your kids? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you don't get anywhere because it's all this pro forma conversation things. That's how I take your note.
Well, you start once you exhibit curiosity. This is what happens. People like to talk about themselves. So if I say to you, because I don't know where you were born, mm-hmm. but if I say to you, where were you born, and you tell me, it's a way into your life.
Sure.
And what happens is you're usually, because people like to talk about themselves. Yeah. Oh, I was born in Chicago. And, oh, well, what part of Chicago? You see what I mean? You can get a hook going there. And that's what I call building a bridge to your audience.
Nice.
And you have to have the bridge in order for your communication to reach the other side of the bridge. But you have to have the bridge. Yeah. So if you're just talking to someone and you haven't built a bridge of relationship, it's going nowhere.
I totally agree. Let me say a couple of things because I want to go back in time a little bit. We had Jack Brennan on the show. You must know who Jack is. You probably have met Jack, but Jack was, for the audience, Jack was Richard Nixon's last chief of staff after he was president, and he was the senior Marine in the White House during the Nixon administration. And so he's seen and done it all. He's advised other chiefs of staff, and I got to ask him the question. I'm like, these times, and this is 2 years ago, but roughly the same kind of social setting. These times seem so tough and challenging, but you've seen a lot more than we have. Is this particularly crazy or dangerous? And he looked at me and he's like, no, yes, there are problems, but you have to understand there's not a global war going on. There's actually not a civil war actually happening right now where, all these men are dying. And that perspective, I think, provides a powerful thing. We get a little precious with our time and with our goals. And so it impacts our ability to lead well, to communicate well, because one of my favorite things to say when people talk about the 1%, I'm like, scope the camera back. Look at the whole globe and let me know about the 1%. Because there's people that don't have water in their house, or we bring them fresh water, but there's no sewer, And so all of these things, you add some perspective in and you learn to kind of shut up and say, hey, these are puzzles that are not so easy to solve.
Absolutely. Well, Churchill said, and Churchill's my great icon that I go back to all the time, but he said, the further you can look back, the farther you can go ahead.
Yeah.
So, and actually I was working with a client of mine this morning. We were talking about, he's a pilot.
Okay.
And we were using a similar kind of metaphor. So he has his own plane, and he goes up a maximum of 31,000 feet, not 30,000, but 31,000 feet, right? So what we were talking about, the higher you go, the more in depth you can go, because even just this physical metaphor of flying, you're seeing more of the landscape.
Sure.
And that allows you to know more. Follow that. So Churchill's saying, look back in history, which is absolutely true. And we suffer. We suffer terribly from the fact that we don't look back in history. Mm-hmm. We don't have any context. We're not using the lessons of the past, like Gettysburg. Yeah. The lessons that were learned on that excruciatingly cruel battlefield. How to apply those today, that's something that we actually need to do and study and put in place. But generally, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. So we have to learn these things all over again. But I think that building relationships, is if we don't do that, that's a critical failure of culture. And it's a critical, and what does it result in? It results in lack of communication ability. And again, going back to the other leg of the three-leg stool is leadership.
Yeah.
People aren't going to listen to you.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to say in my little thing, like you reminded me of two things. We had a guest on recently, Abigail Schreier, and she's looking at the, and we're not going to get into the topic, but I'm just going to introduce who she is. She studied the dramatic uptick in female to male adolescent girls transitioning. You know, like I'm trans, I'm not just a female. And so it doesn't follow the science, doesn't follow the literature. And maybe this stuff is changing, but she's like pointing out this problem. And one of the elements of this problem is that she's recognized that the social media problem with these outside influences are changing and kind of cloistering us. But also, like, these kids aren't, they're not apt to go through the work to develop these relationship skills. You know, they haven't had a first kiss. They haven't had to walk across a dance floor and ask someone else to dance. And so these things that you have to learn that, like, they feel horrible in middle school when you do them, you know, because everybody's awkward and everybody's terrified, but you have to develop the ability to do these things so that you can function as an adult. And I'm not saying that a dance is the right way to do this, but if you never are forced to get uncomfortable and do something, and what I call, and you know, you call it any way you want, but I call it miscomfort. It's a comfort you don't know. And so you assume it's bad. You assume it's discomfort. But in reality, once you go and engage a stranger within a conversation and have this wonderful experience, like talking across the internet to someone who you're, you know, yesterday I fell in love with another guest. I'm like, I love you. This is great. If you're afraid to do that interaction piece, you can't develop the skills to become good at developing relationships and understanding the culture and communicating and then ultimately becoming a leader.
Well, you're very good at it because you're genuinely interested in your guests and what their ideas. But what you say really reminds me of something going on in my life right now. So I've gone to 2 of my high school reunions, and I'm going to be going to a college reunion. Okay. I'll tell you that the high school reunions, might seem strange to people, are much, much, much more meaningful to me than the college. Why? Because in my particular instance, so I grew up in one place, right? And I went to public school, with the same group of people from kindergarten through 12th grade. We had the same group. We saw each other every day. Yeah. And what is your most excruciating time in life? When you're growing up, you know, when you're an adolescent, or when so these people, man, I'm going to tell you, we know everything about each other. We know everything. You know, we went to parties in each other's rec rooms and family rooms. We bicycled everywhere together. When we got our first cars, these are first things that are happening in your life, and you're sharing them really. Now sharing with this tight knit group of friends. Yeah. So you have this bond, and I'm going to tell you, I moved away. A lot of them moved away, but we came back together. It wasn't that at this time in life we're doing that much that's similar. I had a path through politics and government that I don't think anyone else had. They had their own great paths, but we had felt this bond that I did not feel in my college reunion, because it was during the developmental years. And what you say about especially the need for adolescents and pre-adolescents to have relationships and to be helping each other through them, even though they might be laughing at you, they might be tripping you in the hallway or doing really doofus things, you still have a relationship. It might not be, there might be a bully, there might be this or that, but you still have to work it out.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, for all the great things about social media and the internet and everything, it is hard. Like someone I was having a conversation with about masks and the pandemic and everything, but just stop worrying about other people, and other than invite them out for a conversation and a walk. Go get to know someone that you don't necessarily agree with, because you probably agree on a whole lot of things. You know, it's just you're arguing over 10% or 15% of what you believe. And you have to hear these other people to really be able to do that. As a leader, someone who is given the job, that's a leadership position, a lot of people that I've encountered don't really have specific leadership training. And I was in the Army. I went through PLDC, Primary Leadership Development course. I didn't really learn how to be a leader. It was the first step in that process. But what does someone do who's like, yeah, you're now managing this store? Like, you're really managing a business, and so that makes you a leader of people, but it doesn't mean you're actually a good leader.
I think this is very interesting. You know, I'm watching a series, Netflix series called Borgen. I don't know if you watched this. It's incredible. Okay, so this is about a woman who becomes a prime minister of Denmark, and it's meant to be. I'm not going to say a thriller, but it's basically all around politics and leadership. So there's 3 seasons. I highly recommend this.
Okay,
there are 3 seasons. There are 3 seasons, and each show, it's not meant to be an educational show, it's an entertainment show, right? But each segment is about a leadership challenge, a leadership opportunity. And this woman had to learn how to be a leader. And I think the 2 things I take away from the fact that she went from being, she was a member of their parliament, right? But she had to earn her stripes and work hard to be ambitious to become the leader of the country, right? So she becomes prime minister. So how does she do it? 2 things I'm observing. In every single episode, basically every episode is a political challenge that's thrown her way and how she deals with it. Again, it's a dramatic series. It's not a leadership course, but I feel like I could write a book based on each of the segments that they produced. Incredible writing, right? So what I'm observing is 2 common threads in this development of leadership are you have to know your constituents, and you have to make your constituents, this could be your employees, your kids, your family, your community, whatever. You have to convince them that you're more interested in them than you are in yourself. So you have to show them the kind of interest, curiosity, capacity to care about them, that they throw back their confidence in you. You've earned their confidence in you. You must do this. Secondly, you have to be strong and decisive. So you almost say, well, gee, Jim, I mean, those 2 things fight against each other. Yeah. But let's say she started her path to being prime minister, and she's a little bit more weighted on the side of earning the trust of her constituents, right? So she's really focused on them, and she stays true to this through the whole 3 years. But then she has to add being decisive and being strong. Now, I'm not saying bullying. I'm saying decisive and strong. People respect leaders, and they want to be led by people that they trust and they respect. But at first, you have to earn the respect of those people. I was doing the turnaround one time of a private school, and it was probably one of the most difficult assignments I've ever had. So I was brought in by the board of trustees, and they wanted me to focus on the financial structure of the school. And then eventually they said, well, you're going to have to run this school. And I said, well, no, I'm not going to be the head of the school. And they said, well, at least you have to do it on an interim basis, which is what I did. I had an extremely difficult time establishing. In fact, I think I was a complete failure, but I had a very difficult time establishing my position as a leader because I never gained the confidence of my constituents, because it was a very politicized situation. And I don't mean I was, to what I thought, I worked 24/7 to try and earn their trust and their confidence. But they had been through such periods of lack of confidence in their leader to automatically overnight, I tried to bend over backwards to earn their support and their trust in me as their leader. Very difficult to earn that. And so it's not, when I talk about leadership and earning leadership, I know, I've got the stripes on my back and times when I failed at it. And I know that I was failing, and it made it even harder for me because they needed leadership. They needed the light, and I'm not saying that this is any personal attribution of mine, but I was in a position of leadership. So I needed to hold those reins and to guide the institution. Very difficult. So I know that it's not easy to gain that, but it is something. In order to be the effective CEO of a company or an organization or a family, in order to get through the tough times. I mean, look at these companies like Boeing. Their CEO fired because he didn't relate to his stakeholders, his customers, and his investors, right? Because he didn't communicate. And he didn't communicate well because he didn't know himself and he didn't understand his constituents.
Boy, I am glad that we got to this part of the conversation, because one of my favorite examples of this.
Because you wanted to hear me tell how I suffered and failed?
No, listen, I always love that because we all learn from that. And I like to say that, like my tree of life is a bonsai tree, and I've snipped off all my mistakes, and all I'm left with is this stick.
Yeah.
Like, I've made them all. And that's why I can have these kind of conversations, because I know to shut up and let people talk and ask the right questions. So my thing I wanted to bring up was Ban Ki-moon, I believe I'm saying his name right, ran the UN for a while. And he had this brilliant quote that, look, whether he did a good job or not, that's for someone else to talk about. But he said, "I tried to lead by example and nobody followed." Like, well, I would say that's a leadership problem, because you can't be running off in a direction that nobody follows you. You've got to go the speed of your people, and you can build speed, but if they're not willing to follow you, then, you failed as a leader. It's my job as the host, as the producer of the show, to make sure that the audience comes with me. It's your job to make sure that your clients get there, and you have to lead them towards the outcome that you guys all agree on, even if it's hard. But if no one's following, you might be in a leadership role, but you are not succeeding as a leader. As hard as that is to take, it is on the leader.
And this relates to what we were talking about before, because there are a lot of, I would say, solitary leaders sitting in the corner office, and they're not, my dad was a General Motors executive, and he gave me three things. So he was a business executive. Worked for a huge corporation his whole life, but he was a teacher of Dale Carnegie. He taught people how to communicate. So at age 7, my brother and I had to go to all of his classes, and that was fascinating. And then he was a musician. So he gave me all three things. He gave me the business, the strategy, which I'm passionate about. He gave me the communication, and he gave me music. So he assumed that, a lot of kids don't necessarily follow their parents' lead, but I guess I did. Maybe it wasn't even conscious, but I'm grateful for it, tremendously grateful for it. But I would say that he would invite me into his factories. And he would say, "I want you to go down the line, and I want to watch how you relate to all the men and women who work in this factory." It was tough. It was tough on me. So he would observe, okay, your handshake wasn't firm enough. You didn't look him in the eye. You didn't blah, blah, blah. So what was he telling me? He was really pushing me in the leadership path by what? Making sure I could relate to people who were maybe they didn't look like me, maybe they didn't talk like me, whatever. And he was making sure that I respected them enough that they could feel it. And I think that's one of the greatest life lessons I've ever had. That is how you really become a great leader. It's not by pleasing people. They don't want to look to their leaders as pleasers. They want to look to them as maybe even a little better than themselves. I want to be led by someone who's smarter and more effective than I am. And so that's a part of leadership, but I want to trust that person cares enough about me. And you see this massively in the U.S. Congress, for example. I don't care what side you're on. You have people going there. They serve a lifetime, which I think is completely wrong. It wasn't the idea. The way the founders set it up, they assumed you would go, you would serve a term or 2 terms or something like that, and then you would go back to farming or whatever your career was, right? Now these people, they spend their lifetime there, and then you go back and you look at their constituents, or you look at what they're representing. The place is a mess.
Yeah.
What are they doing for them? To me, I just take that's offensive to me. They're more interested in then. That's why I think the Congress has such a poor public rating.
Yeah.
Now there's certainly exceptions, no question about that. Now I don't mean to blame everyone, but I just see in general a lot of people wanting to be leaders because of their own ego or their own achievement, and you have a lot of people out there that teach do a lot of podcasts, and it's all about self-promotion.
Yeah, I mean, now I have to find a way to not promote myself here. No, I totally agree. One of the things when I look at people in leadership positions, and we'll use the president in general, like at a non-specific term, but there are basically very few problems. And I'm asking because you've been there. There are very few problems that come up that are easy. Like they've been kicked upstairs because they are hard. They are impossible. These are, you're trying to balance 2 unbalanceable things with negative outcomes no matter where you go. When a global pandemic shows up, when a couple of people fly planes into buildings, these aren't problems that anyone is qualified to know what the answers are. You have to deal in simultaneously in like the tactical time and then the strategic time. So talk a little bit about these problems. I mean, on a smaller scale, every leader of a company has these kind of things to deal with. You don't have enough resources and time, and you have to marshal it the best way you can. And then some radical comes in, free radical, not a person, and causes chaos in your system.
Yeah, but as a leader, you are responsible for having a disaster plan in place.
Okay.
So if you don't, I mean, we're in cyber war right now. So I have a friend, Michael Bryce, who has an incredible company where he advises CEOs and corporate structures on how they keep their data safe. I mean, he just sent out a warning this morning about there's some massive intrusion into healthcare records today that he's observing, right? So he and I talk about this all the time. The companies, for example, this is a very specific example. Companies often think that they're safe because they have a big IT department.
Yeah.
IT does not equal cybersecurity.
Right.
IT is managing, designing, installing applications, right? But in terms of the safety of your data, the safety of your workforce, how are you protecting against that? And are you now, in the White House has, all kinds of security roles in place. And the military, of course, does this too. They do doomsday, plays, role plays all the time, which is critically important. And I'm glad they do. And I hope they're doing even more and more of it. The White House has that too. For example, in the White House I served in, when President Reagan was shot at, they knew exactly where the motorcade was going to go, where it was going to take him, how they got on the radio to tell them, he was down and they had to be prepared and blah, 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 blah. So that had been rehearsed. But how much of leadership today really, whether you're running, I don't care what size company or what size organization you're running, and even in your family, you need to have a doomsday plan in place. And doomsday sounds kind of harsh, but that's what it's called. But I'm just saying, you have to know what you're going to do in a case of a serious threat against your family or a threat against your country or your company. And it's inexcusable if you don't have that. So a part of that is knowing how you're going to communicate it, knowing how you're going to communicate with your constituents about what has happened. And you see, like in the famous case of the oil spill, where the chairman of British Petroleum says, "Oh, I can't wait to get back to England because I want to go on my yacht."
Yeah.
Where all these people have been harmed. The beaches have been desecrated. There are birds with oil all over them, and he's standing there in front of it saying, "Oh, I can't wait to get back on my boat." Well, he was fired, of course, but so you have this situation where you're talking about emergency, a critical situation, which he could not have planned.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Right.
Maybe there wasn't enough prevention, all that kind of thing. But there he comes face to face with it. So yeah, no question. Every leader has to know how they're going to deal with that. So you have, especially, in the White House, we had this thing, of course, the president would say, because the president always you have to be awakened in the middle of the night. Yeah, think about it. You have to know what's going on in every part of the world, and you need to know if you have to react to it, or you have to respond to it. And as people on the White House staff, we had to know when to tell. You just don't wake the president up for the fact that it has to be a major thing that he's got to deal with. But you have to be ready for that. And I think the White House, you mentioned having Nixon's chief of staff on. I think that the White House is a good crucible for other, and I think that's why so many corporations want to hire 4 or 5-star generals after the generals retire. They have a huge pitching contest over the Pentagon. When these people retire, all these corporate recruiters come in and they bid for these people. Yeah. And I've often said, well, why is that? Are these 4-star, 5-star generals really that superior? And why do they want them so much? Well, a lot of it has to do with military preparation, how that military preparation relates to organizational readiness, right? But you do get, I think, working in the government, especially at the highest level at the White House, just the way the White House travels around the world, we take our entire motorcade with us. Yeah. We create an entire communication system. We don't rely on local communication, all that kind of stuff. No one, I would say, 99% of the entire world has no idea what a secure package is like. You've been in the military, so I'm sure you understand that. Yep. But that is kind of the highest level of leadership. Why? Well, of course, it's the highest level of leadership. The President of the United States is the most potent leader in the entire world. But the lessons in leadership that you get from that have to do with the fact that the cost for failure is excruciatingly high.
Yeah. That cost. I mean, normally I take my show on the road quite a bit. I would go to you and sit across from your house. Like if I came to wherever part of the world you're in, I always try to set up local things. And that means I've got to travel with my complete my kit. And so I've got to be, portable, mobile, reliable, professional. And I can't have a bunch of variables like, hey, do you have wireless? I might ask for that, but I need to have my immediate contingency. Okay, we're going to use my phone. That means I have to make these sacrifices. And there's already a decision tree that I've already worked through, on all these things. And I'm just, one, two, maybe 3 people traveling around when we do this. I mean, the president, they bring their own cars, their own comms, their own security.
Food.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because it's there are a lot of variables, and if you want to do the job right. One of the things I'm curious about, because you have worked with President Reagan, he had a knack, and maybe it was the last president, maybe not, but maybe it seems like he was the last president where everybody was positive about what he was saying and what he was doing. We got really divisive shortly after that. He would come out of those meetings with Gorbachev, and you just knew he was going to give it to him, and he was going to come out with good news. I'm not saying the presidents are bad leaders, but why have we lost that? Was it just that Reagan was such a great communicator, or what do you think it is? Why are presidents just like 50-50 propositions for people now?
Well, don't you think we get what culture gives back to us? So yeah. I think that in the case of Reagan was obviously an old school person. My last book before this current book called True Reagan, it was a bestseller as well. It was the only book that broke down or defined, I guess you'd say, described Reagan's faith and character and belief system as he told it to me. So this is the only book where you'll find this. There are lots of biographies, many good ones about Reagan, but this delves into, because I'll tell you, when I went to work there, of course I was a Reagan supporter, and I was beyond honored to have this opportunity to work there. But I couldn't get them. I couldn't understand the Reagans. I couldn't I didn't come from California. I didn't come from the film industry.
Yeah. I
I didn't come from politics. I came from business.
Yeah.
So I'm but I knew in order to really serve them to the best of my ability, I had to understand them. Like when I take on a new client, the first thing I do is listen. I don't talk because I have to figure them out. So I tried, and they were not easy to figure out. I had to figure them out. And fortunately, I developed a relationship directly with the president and traveled the world with them. But I was in a unique position, but I had an opportunity to ask him a lot of questions. Like, who are you? Like, where did you come from? Why? I mean, and I'm not just talking, I knew where I was born. I'm just saying, where did your beliefs and your convictions come from? Now, look, when we talked earlier about the two things of leadership, being decisive and making your constituents feel that you care about them, right? So I think Reagan had that in spades. And I will also tell you some of the most important things about Reagan. He had zero ego. Now, have you ever met a human being that had no ego? This was a man, he had no ego. He left the White House the same as he went in. He didn't care what people thought of him. Now, some people thought, well, that's weird. They thought they used that to actually denigrate him. Right. Well, why? He doesn't have that many friends. Why? He doesn't care what people think about it. Follow this for a minute. If you don't care what people think about you, you're not susceptible to them controlling you.
Yeah.
Follow this. If you don't care what the oil industry thinks about you, or you don't care about your polling numbers, you're not going to adjust or change or modify your position on any kind of issues just because you want someone to be your friend. Now, how many people could you say are not influenced by the need to be liked by other people? Most politicians do. Reagan did not care. And that, as a result, I saw that as the most important aspect of leadership that you could ever have. So when Reagan, so people say to me, all the time, a million times I've asked it, okay, what was it like, to be next to Reagan, and what was he like? Well, he was the greatest human being that I've ever had an opportunity either to be with, even much less to work for. But they'd say, well, oh wow, but I would tell you the other flip side of that. He was very impersonal. He was not a buddy kind of person. He was not a person who would say, which I've worked for other presidents and other leaders who would, hey, let's go golfing, or what do you think of this, or what do you think? Reagan was an incredibly kind person, but he was not personal. Yeah, and maybe that's a little bit hard for me to communicate. He didn't have the need to have personal relationships. Now, I had to learn why was that. I mean, it was very kind to me. We had many one-on-one conversations and about a lot of different things. He called me on the phone if he needed to, blah, blah, blah. But you had the feeling that you were really working for a great leader, but his mind was not overpopulated by personal concern.
Yeah.
He was focused on the big issue. And what was the big issue to him? He was an evangelist for freedom in the world. He wanted to promote freedom, personal freedom, for as many people as he could while he was in power. And why did he want to do that? He wanted to do it because he wanted people to be free to worship their God. That was his main purpose in life. And he he hated talking about, people say, oh, Mr. President, what do you think about your legacy? He had no interest in his legacy, so to speak, but I think he did see his place in history. And as a result, history sees his place in it.
It's an interesting thing. You know, one of the things I've learned along the way as I've trimmed my bonsai tree down to a stick is that when people say things like, I want to be on the right side of history, not your call. It's just not your place to determine that. You know, history determines that for you. I mean, Truman is a great example of this. He leaves office, you know, as the worst president ever. And after doing no legislation for 20 years, he just gets better and better, you know, being dead for 40 years.
Have you ever been to the Truman Library? Have you ever been to the Truman Library?
I have. I love it there. It's so great.
I tell you, I've been to almost all presidential libraries and spoken at many. And I will tell you, the Truman Library was a complete game changer for me. So, and Truman was a favorite of my dad. And we're going through the Truman Library, you recognize there's been no other president that has had to manage as many crises as he did.
Yeah.
No, not even Roosevelt, the Great Depression and World War II. Truman was left. It was all left in his lap. But then he had more war. You know, then he had Korea.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he had the bomb. He had tremendous, the Marshall Plan. He had all this kinds of stuff.
So impossible.
And no one really knows about it.
Yeah, I'm actually reading a book for a guest that's coming up, and he writes about, you know, basically the beginning of the Cold War and then going forward from there. But just that whole thing, you know, like we're focused on winning World War II, and then we realize, holy cow, the Russians have all this stuff already in place. You know, we're now playing catch up, but we're so far behind, it's going to take decades to get, you know, and yeah, he had to figure that out. It's really remarkable when you look at that. And then, what is it, do you think, as a nation, why do we want, and I'm not saying, let me say this a different way. The president is a reflection of who we are and how we get along in the world, you know. And right now, we just don't have candidates that make a lot of sense for what we all want. You know, we're having trouble encouraging, I wouldn't want to be president when I see how the presidents are treated, whether it's Obama, Bush, Trump, it doesn't matter. We treat them like we hate them, and they have this impossible job where, you know, again, who's going to manage a global pandemic? Who's going to say they were going to do it better? I mean, it's such an impossible thing. But who would even want the damn job now? That kind of a leader has to be someone that I just don't know where they're at, and they probably would rather just run their billion-dollar company and make money and go on their yacht, you know?
Why would anyone want to run for any political office today when your kids are going to be vilified? They're going to, you know, they're looking for stories. I get it though. Okay. Having been there, I get this, that the media, and I don't think, you know, when the founders created, obviously we have to have a free and open media. So, and that's critically important. I totally believe in that, but I don't know if the founders knew that the media was going to become a massive profit-making industry.
Right.
Okay. Not to mention social media platforms. Okay. So today, I get this. A lot of people, they don't get this. They think that the media, oh my gosh, these are sacred people. They're saying the truth.
Yeah.
They're not saying the truth.
No, they're not.
What they're doing is getting a story.
Yeah.
So last night, let's say last night. So you watch, I don't know, Lester Holt or something. So I was just like going through. Okay, so they said, oh, tonight, stand by because we have 8 late breaking stories that are happening right now. You can't afford to change your dial.
Yeah.
I mean, something like that, right? Okay, what is especially television media, right? What is their job? Their job, they get paid millions of dollars to get audience numbers up. Why? To get paid advertising. Yep. How do they keep their audience coming? Controversy.
Yep.
Why? And this is the sickening thing to me. Do you know, like, if you see a story about, oh, you know, someone was killed in some terrible story. It's all like crime and everything. So you say, I always say, at that very moment that was happening, that terrible, terrible bad thing. And I agree, there are many bad things. 10 trillion more good things were going on that are never reported.
Right.
So people get out of balance. They think that the world is going to hell, that we're at the end of the world. But at the same time, there are millions of people carrying soup to their next door neighbor. There are millions of people that are bending over and helping some kid who fell down. There are millions of people who are tutoring kids who are not, what I'm saying? There's so much more good going on. But the media thinks the only way they can sell advertising is through controversy. And I get it. Yeah. So what happens? Okay, no matter who sits in the White House, and by the way, you said something about Truman. Truman was a president who had no ego either. He didn't care what people thought of him. When you go to his library, you see, and they tell you, well, this is where Truman, after he leaves office, he brings a brown bag freaking lunch, eats at his desk in his presidential library. He brings a brown bag lunch and eats at his desk. He didn't care. But anyway, to go back to this media thing, media has really created a toxic environment for leadership that is incredibly expensive to our country, because good people, I'm afraid, unless they are very thick-skinned or unless they're absolutely perfect human beings, and I don't know many who are. I mean, if I were to run for office, they'd go back to my sixth grade class and, okay, let's say I hit a guy, or I, threw a basketball at him in the gym or something like that. They're always looking to denigrate, not because they're necessarily hateful people, but because media has been equated with controversy. And they are always looking for controversy. You see that the show I was telling you about, Borgen, the whole thing is going on. It's really media and politics. And you see they're always looking for an angle. And very often, it's not so much that they want to be badly manipulative of people, but this is the business of the media. You can't just report factually. And this is why Reagan felt that he had to reach out to, and this is why Trump, for better or worse, uses Twitter. People say to me, they're always asking me to compare Reagan and Trump. I say, well, but if Trump would just shut down his Twitter account. Well, Reagan had his quote unquote Twitter account. He felt, I'll tell you, everywhere we went in the world, he wanted to communicate directly with the people. Yeah. Unfettered by the media. He didn't want to be interpreted by anyone else. Yeah. So what did he do? He started his own Saturday radio show. It was the first time a president had done that.
That whole idea of communicating directly with the people too is important. I quit watching the news a long time ago, partly because of the things you outlined. I don't want to be sold something. And I've got a mass comm degree, so I know that the rules are supposed to be. Like it's you're creating. Who, what, where, when, why, how. Basic interrogatives of what this story is. And if you want to add in your thing, that's later on in the article. But just tell me what happened. But you watch these press briefings, and all of the press briefings, they're always a show. But it's a show. And so like Jim Acosta from CNN will stand up and say, why did the president lie to me? He gets one, maybe two questions. And he puts out this preposterous question that's not going to get an answer. And it's all grandstanding. And I look at how important that role is, and how many people would love the opportunity to just do straight news in there. And he leads with, why did the president lie to the American people? And it's just like, what are we doing here? Like, we can't.
But he did his job. Yeah. His job. He only had one job. That was to get a cut to appear on the evening news. Yeah. Yeah. That was one job to do. Absolutely. I know that that's how it works. And what is he going to, he's not going to get up and say, hey, I really liked the dinner you put on last night. No, he's going to stand up and he's going, that is his job. Yeah. It is his job. And more people understood that, I think we'd have better press. And, everyone dreams about what would I do if I were president? Yeah. And you think, what I wouldn't do and what I would do. But of course, one of the things that people want to have is they want to have good, positive relations with the media, but It's tough.
I want to ask one more real quick question along those lines too. The president doesn't get to just, like the president's all run now, like on day one, I will do this. And granted, executive orders aside, no, you're describing the legislature's job. And a lot of cases, and this is all of them, like you were a legislator or you are a legislator. What's taken you so long? So we don't have a lot of consensus building people and a lot of people that you don't get to do what you want to do. You don't get the security team that you want, you get the one that you get, and then you can shape it from there. But because no one's prepared for this job for the most part, You have to build these things in. I mean, what president hasn't dramatically improved from day one to day 1,000? It's such a hard thing to sort out. So how does someone, again, not the disaster plan side of it, but when you take on a job with so many variables, so many different things that can happen, how does someone who you don't get your agenda, you have to build consensus as the president? How does someone do that well?
I think that most people, unless you've been in, a lot of our presidents have been in government in some way. And so I think that has given perhaps some perspective to this leadership role. But here you have basically a person who never served with Trump, speaking of Trump, a person who never served in government before. So he didn't know that, bang, you hit these roadblocks. Okay, no, you have to negotiate with Congress to do that. Oh, you have to get that bill passed because you're president, you don't have any money to spend. You don't realize that? You realize that? The president, you can create bills, but you have to get them passed, right?
Yeah.
So the White House doesn't have any money to spend. I mean, maybe there's some little discretionary pockets of money you can do, but they don't have any money to spend. So you see what happened. So Trump, obviously, I mean, any president who would be in power right now, they want to end the COVID. They want to get rid of it, for heaven's sakes, and they want to survive. And yet you have the Congress. I agreed with something I saw someone wrote this morning. They should all be fired. The entire Congress for not coming up with the next COVID relief plan. And it's all political. And I'll tell you, if there's one thing that really, really bothers me, is this done in the best interest of the American people? No, it's a political stunt. It's a political stunt. And I think that is really outrageous. So, I would hope that in the future, we could have a better quality of selfless leadership for our country that's focused on a vision of what every day, Reagan said, America's best days are still ahead.
Yes.
And he believed in the future of America, and he believed that America was a shining city on a hill. And if that light ever grew dim, it would throw the rest of the world into disaster. So, we're not an island to ourselves. We're not a nation that can just pursue its own objectives. The reason we do it is because we are the best, highest quality and the most productive and efficient way of government that the world has ever seen. And it's designed to protect the individual liberties of everyone who lives here. And the government works for us. We don't work for the government. The government serves us. And we must remember that. And that was what Reagan felt. And people like that. People like to hear that because it's absolutely true.
Yeah, we had Michael Reagan on the show, Ron's son, and we were talking. He's like the last president also that has speeches that you can quote from immediately. This shining city on the hill, slipping this early bonds, all these things that, they're just part of who we are now because he was so great at that. And, it's one thing to have a great speech written. It's another thing to perform it in a way that we all go, yeah, this is a remarkable place. And we often forget how remarkable that this place is. And again, go somewhere else and you'll see how remarkable the United States are. The fact that we can have this much discord and still move forward as a nation is pretty remarkable. A lot of places would break up under this much stress. So I want everybody to definitely go check out Get Winning Your Audience on Amazon. There's the link. It's been great to talk to you, James.
Really, I've enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, it's fun to be able to bring these scenarios up. And it's one thing to have someone, and God bless all these people that do it. Like, I'm a coach, whatever. But you've actually done it. You've been around incredible leaders. You've built your lessons on the things that you've done wrong, like I have. And it's just great to have that kind of experience and wisdom delivered because we're all trying to figure this out. We all got to give each other a break and let everybody learn at their pace. And that communication, culture, leadership triangle, it's not easy to get through. Everything's a balancing act. And then someone's always throwing cans of fruit at you while you're trying to balance. You're like, I'm trying to balance over here, because life doesn't slow down. So I appreciate you coming on and giving us some of your knowledge. It's really been fantastic.
Hey, thank you so much for inviting me. I enjoyed it a lot.